In 1988, a 22-year-old woman sat with a decision that would change the course of basketball history. She had already had one abortion, and she was considering another. If she had made a different choice, the greatest shooter the world has ever seen would not exist.
Can you just talk about how special that is to share this with him?
We talk a lot about fathers in sports. Early morning workouts, NBA bloodlines, and yes, Dell Curry gave his son a jumper, and without a doubt, his presence and love has had immeasurable effects. But as for Steph's mentality, the discipline, the refusal to shrink, I'd argue that came from his mother. Sonya Curry grew up in Virginia in the late 60s, a biracial child in a world that never quite knew where to place her. Not white enough, not black enough, denied education, not seen the way she saw herself. So she learned something early. Walk into the room anyway. Advocate anyway. Believe anyways. Years later, her son would hear something familiar. Too small, too skinny, impractical, not built for the NBA. But he never folded, because before Stephen Curry changed basketball, he was raised by a woman who refused to let him shrink. This matters because we misunderstand greatness. We think it begins with talent, with genetics, with opportunity. But what if greatness begins earlier than that? Before the trophies, before the contracts, before the draft night handshake? What if greatness for Curry began with a mother who refused to let her child believe he's less than? If Sonya folds to insecurity, if she accepts what the counselors at school say, if she doesn't advocate for herself, then maybe Steph doesn't either. And basketball looks very different today. Steph's greatness didn't start with him. It started with his mother. When Steph chose Davidson, nobody questioned it. Not because it's a great program, but because Curry was not yet popular. His time at Davidson was the beginning of what would become a legendary career.
Stephen agrees to go to Davidson, and I walked to the door with Coach McKillop and said, "Okay, Coach, I'm gonna fatten him up for you." And Coach McKillop put his hand on my shoulder and said, "I'll take him just the way he is." And tears just flowed.
The confidence they had in Curry, not just as a player, but the human being, was the start of something special. Soon enough, he exploded onto the national scene. Things were going smooth. But then came the NBA. Having been drafted 7th overall by the not-so-great Golden State Warriors in 2009, things were different now. There was this new element that he never really had to worry too much about until now. It's called the curse of expectation. Not just to be great and turn the franchise around, but also to be comparable to his father, Dell Curry. The early narrative was, he can shoot, but can he sustain it? Then it turned into, he's skilled, but can his body hold up? And to be fair, the ankle injuries were real. There were moments when it wasn't clear if he would become a star or just another talented guard with potential. And in those moments, something surfaced. Patience, discipline, faith. Steph would later say during those injury years that he learned to run his own race. That mindset didn't appear out of nowhere. That's inherited resilience. Sonya grew up in an in-between space. Not fully embraced, not fully rejected. Steph's early career felt the same way. Not doubted enough to be hated, not dominant enough to be feared, just questioned. And that in-between space either breaks you or builds you. For Sonya, it built her backbone. For Steph, it built a dynasty. 4 championships, a revolution in spacing, a generation raised on the three-point line, the baby-faced assassin. But before he was that, he was the son watching his mother set the standard. Greatness is not just skill, it's a framework. It's the emotional architecture you inherit before you ever inherit talent. Steph inherited a jump shot from his father, but from his mother, he inherited self-belief under pressure, advocacy in hostile rooms, faith when the outcome isn't guaranteed, preparation before validation. That's why when the moment came, he was always ready, because greatness didn't start with Stephen Curry's NBA career, it started in childhood. One decision in 1988, one young woman choosing faith over fear. She couldn't see into the future. There was no way that Sonya could have known that the baby she carried would bend the geometry of basketball. She could not have known that arenas would erupt at 30-foot jumpers. She could not have known that her son would change the way the game is played across the world. But she knew something else, that he deserved a chance. See, for the Currys, where greatness really began was in shooting that terrifying shot that you were never really supposed to take, but netting it anyways. Now that's greatness.
Oh!